when he told me he made a seaweed mead, I was like on the other side of the phone going, ew, not saying that out loud. But
you what?
a whole bunch of people have been raving about it. I didn't get the chance to taste it yet, but I'm hoping to at the next Mazer Cup because it sounds really interesting. I don't have any idea what to expect, but that's part of the fun.
Well, see, you went ooh, and I went, oh my God, I'd love to try that.
Well,
that was my first.
The mead maker in me was like, wow, what an interesting idea. But the person that my taste buds are going, I don't know about that. I thought
you just probably
haven't
eaten enough seaweed is all I can say.
I love eating seaweed. I just don't know what
right?
it tastes like.
But in a mead?
Yeah.
In a mead,
yeah.
yeah.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Well, if you think about it, that sweet and salty go together kind of naturally.
They do,
Yep.
yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm interested to see what he got. It seems like it might be cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now I just hope I make it to the party quick enough to get some because it disappears really, really fast. So that's why I booked a room in the Carvin thing. I'm like literally one flight. I'm like underneath Carvin Suite. I'm one floor down, and I'm gonna be like poised at the stairs. I'm just gonna run my ass up there and get me some.
Bring our sprinting blocks.
Yeah, we'll bring our sprinting blocks and
There you go.
Bring your strap to tie your mug to your belt so we don't lose them, and we'll be good.
Ready, go.
Yeah.
Pete, I have a question, if you don't mind, and then maybe a comment for, I don't know if you're ready to end up or not, but
we got
one thing
out there too.
Yeah, one thing I miss, and I don't know how to create it in a mead, is minerality.
That's a tough one in mead. I think getting to minerality starts with getting to tannin. And that's why, to me, that when we're just talking about the seaweed mead or nori mel, you're getting to some minerality there with that kind of like earthy kind of like you're sucking on a rock or a piece of rock that just came out of the ocean, that you have in wine, in red wines and white wines, that you don't see a lot of in mead. And so that's where some of your looking at water profiles, John Palmer wrote a book on water and water science and everything that I'd recommend anybody that's looking into adding some minerality into their meads would want to take a look at, and to see what kind of profiles you can use from the different city water signatures from around the world.
I'm sorry, you said his name was John
Palmer.
Palmer, and the name of the book,
P-A-L, yeah, Palmer.
Uh-huh.
He has that the How to Brew page out there that a lot of people refer to when they're looking for mead, not mead, but just general faults in beer, DMS, ethyl acetate, the different kinds of polyvinyl acetate kind of smells, the taint from like 4-methyl-guaiacol and 4-methylphenol, that kind of thing. He's got a fairly comprehensive breakdown of that kind of stuff on his site, How to Brew. He's a great guy. He's a Southern California guy, and he came out and spoke to one of the brew clubs that I'm a member of out here a while ago over at the brewery in Placentia. And, it just had a lot of really, really interesting water science and things to talk about. And so I think that's a very solid way of getting some minerality into that, because one of the things that's kind of tough is to get a terroir from something that's, a far-flung endeavor by the ladies as they go out to pull the nectar from the flowers that they're going to. They're going all over the place rather than in a concentrated area. You don't get the kind of mineral presence in nectar that you would in a grape that's grown in a chalky soil in a specific section of a vineyard. The limestone or granite or sand or the different kind of mixes of volcanic and metamorphic rocks that they have in different areas in Europe really affect the flavor profile of the finished wine, via the grapes that's being grown there, as well as the influence of the surrounding vegetation. I mentioned the word earlier, garrique, which is the mixture of herbs, generally referring to Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean specifically, things like rosemary and parsley and different kinds of herbs that are growing in an area that have that signature kind of a flavor in some of the wines that are produced there. Not because they infuse them or because they grow the crops specifically around there. It's just kind of a flavor profile that you find in Mediterranean, close to the ocean kind of vineyards. So getting that kind of minerality and all that's going to be really hard to do when you're dealing with blossoms rather than, a vine that has been established in a vineyard for 100 or 150 years, and getting to that kind of minerality that's going to be imparted in the fruit. So, that's something that I think is going to start coming up more and more. And that's a really good question, something to take a look at. But I would recommend that, taking a look at that book. I can't remember the exact title of it, but it's basically talking about water and the role that it plays in brewing. And I would be surprised if it doesn't influence if you're using water that's been adjusted to your mead making too. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of folks that are using RO water now, and I think that's good. I think RO water is great for making mead. Distilled water is fine. There was a long-held notion that distilled water wouldn't make good mead, and that's not true. Just like RO water doesn't make good mead, of course it does. So I'm just, lazy because I don't have an RO system at home. So I go down to the store and I buy a bunch of. I tend to like the water that comes from Crystal Geyser out here in California. It's right at the slope of the Sierras, and it has a good mineral signature, and it's a good, clean tasting water, and so I tend to use that in my batches. So I'll go out and I'll buy, 10 of the 2-gallon jugs of that and start mixing up some mead.
Yeah, I found that some of my, we have about 3 different selections we can choose from spring water that are mostly local here in Denver, and in my opinion, one of them's much more superior than the other 2, and so I just stick with that because I think it makes a better mead. Yeah,
and you'll taste it in the end product. That's the whole thing. It's great to play those games and then go like, oh wow, why did I do that? Oh, now I know not to. And that's part of the learning how to dump before you inflict it on anybody that you know and love.
Well, I don't know. I like to try it on a couple of people before I decide to dump it because my tastes are very different from a lot of people's. Like, there's stuff that I considered a complete failure that my mom likes, and she's really picky about her wines.
No, that's good.
So,
it's good to have that kind of an audience.
I can say the same thing. I made one of the Digby recipes, and I thought it was way... And those are hard to make because he's not really giving you solid information for amounts. So you have this huge list of more things than you would ever consider to throw into a mead. And now you have to figure out, well, was the measurements dry? Were they wet, fresh, picked? And how much do I cut them down and to measure in? So anyway, it ended up being a super meth, way overdone with all the herbs. And after a couple of years of letting it age, it got better for sure. And some people said, man, this is my favorite thing that you make. And I'm going, I don't even really like that. And I ended up actually cutting it in half, diluting it, so to speak, with another traditional. And I think that made it much better. So if I was ever to make that again, I'd probably cut my additions down to maybe 30% of what I started with. Yeah. But it's funny how some people really like something and other people don't. It's the nature of humankind, isn't it?
Yeah, I tend to be, if as far as I'm concerned, I'm the one that's got to live with what I put out there and inflict on others. And if I don't like it, they ain't ever going to taste it, and that's the way it is.
Right. Yeah. I can't imagine you make very many of those anymore, do you?
I've had my share. You know, I won't lie. I've done more than one dump session. It hasn't been as much over the past couple of decades, but early on, let me tell you, I was a regular visitor to the drainage system.
Right.
I've got a couple of batches that are going down the drain because I wasn't here to take good care of them. They got pitched, and then I got sent out of town. So
they're like babies, little children. You got to take care of them and give them what they need to keep them happy out.
You know, that said, I still want to bring a bottle of my very neglected bomb that I'm drinking straight from the jug tonight. I'm going to call it Crime Against Bomb, I think, when I bottle it. Nice. But, you know, I think I still want to bring that by to ask people how bad it really is, because I don't think it's that bad. And all of my friends, you know, they preferred the blackberry mead that hadn't been quite so neglected. But, you know, I still like it, and I can clearly taste the honey character. I know exactly which honey I used for it. So, you know, it's been neglected, but it's certainly not ruined.
Well, see, and that's the thing. I think it's getting to this is drinkable, and yeah, I don't mind sharing this. Mm-hmm. And for me to dump something down the drain, it's going to have obvious faults. And it's not going to be a question of nuance. It's going to be a question of, you know, oh, this is, you know, not right. This has got, you know, out of balance here, way out of balance there, and it just doesn't end up being anything other than a train wreck. And so that's when I dump it. But, you know, I'm very careful about sanitation, and, you know, I use a microscope in every batch to take a look early in fermentation and late in fermentation to see what little beasties are curling around in there, and you know, react accordingly wherever necessary. And I am not afraid to lay on the sulfite if necessary, and I'm not afraid to take it down to, you know, 0.02 sterile filtration if I have to. But the bottom line is, I'm well, you know, my upbringing, I was a microbiology major with a minor in chemistry and worked for 5 years in a medical clinical laboratory at St. Jude Hospital in Fullerton. So my aseptic technique and microbiological technique is pretty solid. And so, you know, when I do cell counts and things like that, I'm looking at them going like, yeah, I've got the adequate biomass, and I don't see evidence of any, you know, possible pathogenic infection there. So forward we go.
Can I come move in with you for about 2 or 3 years? Pete, could I ask one last thing from you, please?
Sure.
And this is more not towards me for sure, but to our listeners. So here's an example to kind of set the stage. I was once a very serious golfer, and oftentimes in the golf magazines, and you got to take those with a grain of salt, because sometimes they even contradict themselves in the same article. But oftentimes you would find that they would say, okay, somebody that has a handicap of thus and so, meaning kind of a hacker, a newbie, so to speak. And they would say, okay, we know that you probably don't drive very accurately. Your strokes to get onto the green is bad. And so then they would group people in different classes of ability. And then in a general sense, they would say, these are the things that you could improve in your game to become a better golfer. I know it wouldn't be very difficult for you to consider what you would probably think would be typical things that maybe a brand new mead maker could do, and then things that an intermediate mead maker might consider to become better. And would it be too hard to maybe divide mead makers into 3 different categories and just in a very broad sweeping generalization?
Like what, with a chainsaw?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you don't want to do that, I understand.
Solomon version of dividing meat makers.
I don't know if that's
a little
worth your
biblical,
time or
don't
not,
you think?
but I'm sure that all of us, regardless of where we are on the